Our first question. This person writes, this seems like a funny question. Actually, I hear that a lot in conversation, video chats, on the phone. People say, now, I have this stupid question. Almost never does it turn out to be a stupid question. No kidding. It just means that the person asking it has never asked it before. Or, in many cases, never heard anybody ask it. Because either it's unusual or it's a question that they feel like everybody else knows the answer to but them. And that's never true. Ever. So this seems like a funny question, but I need words. What does it really mean to not be responsible? That's a good question. Because many people think they are when they're not at all. When you're not responsible, it means that you act like a child, not an adult. Now I'm going to switch your question a little bit and talk about responsibility, and you can just reverse that to make it not responsible. Responsibility is to be accountable for your actions, to be willing to say, yes, I did that. Yes, that is my job. Yes, I caused that. It's being accountable for your own actions, for your own feelings. Another way of saying accountable is not blaming. It means being accountable for your thoughts, for your words. Now, just a second about thoughts. We're probably not accountable for the little flashes of thoughts that come into our minds, because I get asked that a lot. Well, sometimes I just have these thoughts and they describe them, and they're, it's just bizarre thoughts. Sometimes, our brains are really quite busy. There are, I don't know how many billion neurons up there. And a lot of them are just randomly firing. So you'll get thoughts. Whether you feed those thoughts, that's responsible. So it's being accountable for all that stuff. Responsibility is not blaming other people. So your question was about not being responsible. Irresponsible people aren't accountable for anything. Nothing is their fault. They were late because of the weather. They were late because of traffic. They got mad because of somebody else. They thought an ill thought because of what somebody else did. Irresponsible is blaming everybody else on earth. And I know some people, actually more than 100, who blame other people for everything. They go out in the rain and they come back and they blame somebody else for not telling them to take an umbrella. It becomes that ridiculous. Also, you do what you say you'll do when you're responsible, and you do what you're assigned to do. It applies to so many things, to work, to household stuff, to everything. Responsible people just simply they're possessed of integrity. When they say they're going to do it, they do it. If they don't do it, they admit it. It's a fun way to live. You continue. Is it irresponsible to blame other people for what happens to you? Yes. Almost always. You're standing on a street corner and a drunk driver suddenly swerves and hits you. Probably not your fault. Now, if you were out at 3 a.m. drunk on a street corner and another drunk driver hit you, you'd have to take some responsibility for that. What are you doing on a street corner at 3 a.m.? I used to say to my kids as they got older, can we go to this party and we'll come back at 3 a.m? And I say, yes, I trust you. I've taught you to be responsible, but I don't know anything good that happens after pretty much midnight, outside your home. Bad things happen. The incidence of drinking alcohol goes up by a ton. You continue with your questions. Is being irresponsible not pulling your weight? Yes. It's incredibly selfish. How many times in my life have I watched somebody be part of a team doing something, and there's one person on the team who is a master, almost like they're performing in an acting class, looking like they're working. They're moving their hands, they're darting their eyes, they're occasionally looking at the computer, and they're not doing a thing because I've stood behind them and watched, doing nothing. So, yeah, you make everybody else responsible for their jobs, but you count on them doing yours too. And boy, that can apply to studying, career, jobs, common courtesy, honesty. You hold everybody else responsible, but not you. Is being irresponsible, you continue, a great big kind of up yours to the world? Yeah, huge, because you make the world responsible for you. You make the world and everybody in it responsible for making you happy. And there's an entire section on responsibility and how to teach it in the parenting book. And if you look under responsibility in the Master Index on the website, you will see at least 50 references. I mean, tons. You continue. What are good words to use to talk about it? So, see the index. The index gives you lots of actual phrases and sentences to use to talk about becoming responsible, to talk about being irresponsible. It will give you the words to use. The main thing is that irresponsible people the main thing that irresponsible people don't see is the selfishness of it and the short-sightedness of it. They want to be irresponsible, not responsible, but then enjoy the privileges and the choices and the rewards of being responsible people. Watch them. They didn't study in school. They played and goofed around and got drunk and got high. They didn't get a job where they could learn a skill when they were younger. And then when they get older, they blame everybody else for not helping them. Well, those were the people who were studying and doing their homework and practicing at jobs. They want the freedoms irresponsible people do, and income and rewards of responsible people while they are being irresponsible. It's incredibly selfish, very unrealistic, and when they finally see it, it's a very rude awakening from which, after a certain age, it's pretty hard to recover from. After you've been irresponsible and blamed other people for 40 years, yeah, changing that's pretty tough because it's just a reflex to not be accountable and not be responsible. New subject. This writer says, I think it's time that I get serious about doing the relationship differently with my daughter so that I am happier. Here's an example from the other day. She came back from the weekend, or for the weekend, to the house, put laundry in the washer, but didn't take it out to put it in the dryer. Well, she's a big girl. I mean, she's in her mid-20s. I wasn't going to do that for her. And I didn't mention it. I didn't mention to her that she needed to take her clothes out of the washer because she's 20-something years old. She can drive a car and do any other number of activities, knowing that once you put something in the washer, the next step is the dryer. Even I know that. And I don't remember the last time that I moved clothes from anywhere to anywhere. So I wasn't going to do that for her, and I didn't mention it, but I needed the washer, and her clothes were in the washer. So I put her things in a basket. you were very kind, because many people would have just dumped them on the floor. She was very angry. Now, remember earlier somebody asked, what does it mean to be irresponsible? This. So she put the clothes in the washer. She used your washer to wash her clothes. And then she expected, I suppose, that you would just take care of the process after that. I'm surprised she didn't ask you to put her clothes in the washer. She was angry. She didn't take responsibility for not taking her clothes out and blamed me because I didn't do anything with it. So she texts the next day. If you see, this is a quote, if you see that I've clearly forgotten my laundry, could you please either put it in the dryer or kindly, irresponsible people always want you to be kind, kindly remind me that I left the clothes in the dryer. I don't appreciate them being out of the washer and left in a wet pile to get moldy. Could you just talk to me when such matters arise rather than being quiet? It feels very passive aggressive and I don't respond well to that. So the writer says, what do I do? And before we go on with that, keep in mind that irresponsible people are irresponsible about everything. So she's saying, I would like you to kindly remind me to remove them. I would be willing to bet any amount of money that I have on me ever that if the mother had reminded her to move them from the washer to the dryer, she would have gotten a shrug of the shoulders, a huff, a puff, rolling the eyes. She would have gotten all kinds of negative reaction. In other words, with irresponsible people, you can never win. If you remind them, they're mad. If you don't remind them, they're mad. So keep that in mind when you work with irresponsible people who are always simultaneously victims. So you continue. So what do? I haven't responded to the text yet. I feel like telling her that doing her laundry here is not a right, but a privilege, which she has now lost. And you would be entirely justified in saying that. She didn't buy the washing machine. She didn't buy the house that the washing machine sits in. She doesn't pay the electrical bill that runs the washing machine. In fact, she doesn't appreciate that any of that is even involved. She figures that washing machine is there for her use whenever she wants. And this is another example of what irresponsible people do. Donna, my wife, when people use our washer fairly regularly when they come here for events, she lets people know that if they want to use her washer, including our children, then it's their responsibility to keep track of their clothes. You see, it has a timer on it. Washers do. And when you put your clothes in, you know how long it's going to be before they're done. So it's not like a mystery when 3 days later you go, you mean the washing cycle's done? And yet irresponsible people will actually do that. Oh, I didn't know they were finished. Well, see, you put them in May and now it's August. So yeah, the washing cycle's done. So Donna tells them it's their responsibility to keep track of their clothes and get them out as soon as they're finished. I mean, there's a bell that goes off that says, we're done, for heaven's sakes. So you would be justified in removing that privilege, but there is an even nicer possibility. You could say, and I'm not telling you to, you could just revoke her washer privileges if she's been doing this forever, but since you're just learning how to talk to her, you might try something like this. Not exactly, but I'm just giving you words if you don't have any. If I find your laundry in the washer, I would be happy to text you or call out to you to move it to the dryer. Your daughter I'm willing to bet that your daughter has her phone super glued to her ear. So she's going to get the text. So I'll text or I'll call out to you to move it to the dryer. If I have not heard from you within 5 minutes, remember, there's a timer on this thing, then I will take the laundry out and put it in the basket. That's really very reasonable. And if your daughter has any sense at all, it doesn't turn into a moldy pile in 2 minutes. It just is wet and nasty like it was in the washer. If it stays there long enough to become, in your words, this is me still suggesting words to say to her, if it stays there long enough to become moldy, then that would mean you neglected it long enough to make it your responsibility that it became like that. I don't do laundry, and I'm not embarrassed about it, but I'm guessing, I'm going to look over at Donna to get assertion about this, that things don't get moldy in 10 minutes. She assures me that this is true, that they don't. Should they get moldy, then you would rewash them, or possibly even just re-rinse them. This is you still speaking to her. You said that you did not want passive aggression. So this is simply direct communication, which you asked for, of what I require of people who do laundry here as a privilege. Is this the kind of communication more as you would like? End quote. That would be an example of your return text. Now, here's the thing with irresponsible people. She was mad that you didn't tell her. And if you tell her what you require of her, she's probably going to be mad too. So if she continues being mad, no matter how she uses the washer, then at that point you consider saying, every time you use the washer, you get mad at me. So I've decided I want to eliminate the anger. So you can wash your clothes someplace else. It turns out that there are places where you can go and put coins in the little machines, and they will run laundry for an entire football team. And you can dry several loads of washing in these great big dryers, and you are welcome to use those. But this is worth at least trying. New subject. In a previous video chat, we talked about a man who controlled and criticized the 4-year-old who was eating an ice cream sandwich. I don't know if you remember that. It's been several video chats ago. Here's this little 4-year-old. He's eating an ice cream sandwich, and the dad is telling him the right way to eat it. Turns out children eat things, the craziest ways. I had one grandchild who started, the ice cream cones with the little pointy tips, and started at the tip and went up. And I admit it. I do. Part of me is going, that's backwards, right? No, I said nothing. Because as soon as he bit into the little tip, then ice cream ran all down the front of his shirt. Well, now he's going to have to change his clothes or not. But I'm probably not going to pick him up with nasty, gooey ice cream until he does. Kids, leave him alone. It's not worth it. Then the kid, the next day, didn't even want anybody watching him eat, because the experience of being told that he was doing it wrong, eating, was such an assault on his emotions. Little kids are very tender. He didn't even want somebody in the room when he ate his meal the next day. Understandable. Who likes if somebody hits you in the face today and you see them tomorrow, are you going to go up and give them a hug? You're going to remember being hit in the face. And that's what kids remember. So the father has continued doing this controlling thing. And the kid is becoming increasingly neurotic, angry, and he's starting to hoard things. So he'll take toys, food, other things, and he puts them under his bed. And you think, what does that have to do with eating an ice cream sandwich? Everything. If a child is being excessively controlled, He'll do whatever he can to be in control. See? Obsessive compulsive. The child might become an OCD and wash his hands 50 times a day because he's in complete control of that. This particular kid started hoarding things under his bed. Untreated, this kid may grow up to be one of those people who have a house full of stuff. Who knows? But we react to being treated in an unloving way. We always react, and our reaction is pretty much never productive. So the mother has tried to talk to the father, who denies vigorously that he has anything to do with the kid's behavior or that he's making mistakes. Now, back at the top of our discussion again, somebody asked, what does it mean to be irresponsible? This. Really. The very next day after the father just pounded on the kid for how to eat an ice cream sandwich, the kid started behaving neurotically and didn't want people to watch him. And the father denied that there was any link between the two. They're directly linked. So the father made a 4-year-old responsible for suddenly not wanting people to watch him eat. That's classic irresponsibility. So I talked to both parents. And the dad was very stubborn about being right. He didn't do anything wrong, not in his opinion. So I just sidestepped the issue. He wasn't listening. There was no sense us doing this, him saying, no, I'm not responsible. Me saying, yes, you are. No, you're not. Yes, you are. Like kids in a sandbox who say, I had it first. No, you didn't. Yes, I didn't. And it ends up with yo mama. It's a silly discussion. So I sidestepped it and I proposed a 2-week observation period where mom would write down when dad controlled the kid. And the father said, okay, fine. Because interestingly, some people who are irresponsible know they are. They know they're lying. They say, no, I didn't have anything to do with that. Many people have been irresponsible for so long, they really don't know. We look at them and we think, I wonder if I ever put this up on the chats, little chat clips on the website. But this little classic picture of a kid eating candy, and candy's all over his face. And his mother comes in and says, have you had any candy? There isn't any body surface on this kid that didn't have candy on it. No kidding. It was all over his fingers. It was all over his face. When he blinked, there was some on his eyelid. And the kid's going, no, really. Have you had... Why, no, mother. and it turns out that many adults haven't matured past that. So this dad was in complete denial. So he said, sure, fine, write down any of the times that I'm being controlling. The period of time ended, and mom had pages of material of where the father had controlled the kid. So the mother writes to me, okay, so I will tell him the things I observed the last few weeks, and then I'll ask him if he has a plan. I don't think he will, other than I'm just going to keep doing things my way. I can pretty much guarantee that that's what he's going to do. Again, we're back to the first questioner. Irresponsible people have made it a way of life. To be responsible for a mistake would make them too flawed, too defective. They can't handle that. So what do? They take responsibility for absolutely nothing. Guy's 45 years old and he's playing video games and has no job, and he's fed by his mother in his mother's basement. And you ask him, well, how's your life going? Fine. Because he just got his high score on the latest video game. He doesn't see anything wrong with his life. These irresponsible people aren't pretending. So I think you're right. He probably will say, well, I don't see any problem here. Even though you point out 55 ways that he controlled his kid, victims and people who are right never have a plan other than to keep doing things their way. Really, they don't. The guy, I'm dealing with a kid now who's in his 30s, has never had a job for longer than a few minutes. And every time he needs something, a place to sleep, food, whatever, he goes to his parents' house and goes, oh, I've tried so hard, but I just can't find anything. He hasn't had anything. When he says, I've tried really hard to find something, it means that he sat on a park bench somewhere and went, well, I can't see any people who are asking me to come and work for them. So he did his best, and he just goes home and they take care of him. They are literally enabling him to death. And his irresponsibility is going to kill him. So you're right. He probably won't have a plan. You're right. This time I can say, you've been doing things your way the last few weeks and it still hasn't worked. Our little 4-year-old son is still angry, is still acting out, and come with me. And then you lift up the kid's blanket and you show him all the stuff that he's hoarding under his bed. Our child is neurotic. Our child is not happy. There has to be a reason. So I will tell him that from now on, I will point out to him every time he's hurting our son by being controlling or pressuring. Right in that moment, I will tell him. I won't wait till later. That's a pretty good plan. The longer you wait with somebody who's being irresponsible or who's controlling or whatever they're doing, they won't remember it. Because it's just a way of living for them. If you say, yesterday you did this with our son, they'll go, I don't know. I don't think so. Like the kid who said to his mother, no, Mommy, I haven't had any candy, with little Skittles dripping from his lips. Your husband has had plenty of opportunity to come up with his own plan. And I explained to him on the call that he'd have to do something. So what I said to him was, and he knows me, you're being irresponsible and that's not working. So some form of responsibility is going to have to happen, or your kid's going to be irreparably harmed. The child is behaving in a way that could only be a reaction to controlling. And I know your wife, she's not a controlling person. In fact, her nature is to run from conflict. So now back to speaking to the woman who's writing, you get to point out when he's controlling right in the second that he's doing it, or he won't remember it. You continue. And then in that moment, he decides whether he wants to keep doing it or if he wants to do something else. But I don't sit with him anymore and argue with him until he admits that he's wrong. Would that be a good approach? Yes. Because he's already proven that he's irresponsible. He's already proven that he denies everything. And if you bring it up to him, he's going to deny it. We've already, over a lifetime, proven that that's what he's going to do. So there's no sense sitting there until you have a conflict. You conclude. So just pointing it out every time, basically letting him know what he's doing because he doesn't see it. Is that right? Yes. So this applies to a lot of people who are listening. He'll either listen. See, what we tend to do is we point out to somebody something that they're doing, and if they deny it or we have an argument, then we both sulk for, a couple of years before we bring it up again. And in the intervening 2 years, a lot of harm has been done to whoever, me, you, a kid, the business, something. We just don't talk about it. That can't go on. So you point out what he's doing every time he's controlling with your child and hurting him, and he'll either listen because he's tired of hearing it and he's going to finally do something different and listen, or the conflict will escalate. And then you have decisions to make about whether you want to stay in a relationship where the conflict just keeps escalating. But doing nothing is not an option with a child who's being hurt. Somebody has to protect this kid. Protecting an adult, that's a whole different subject. It's a rare thing that we need to do that. But this kid's 4. Somebody has to be an advocate for the 4-year-old who's already hoarding, screaming, doesn't want to be observed while he's eating, gets angry. That's 4. When the kid's 14, you're going to find it much more difficult, like maybe impossible. New subject. I know a man in real life who runs a kind of halfway house where people can temporarily stay until they find government housing. A lady came who was 8 months pregnant and needed a place to stay. She broke the rules, so the man threw her out. That just brought out the victimhood in everybody. An 8-month pregnant woman. See, they have the right to demand everything. And not every 8-month pregnant woman would do this. But when we have something that's obvious to everybody and impairs our function in some way, we tend to use it. Like somebody in a wheelchair. I've seen people in wheelchairs be so malignant and nasty to people who don't go out of their way to help them. And yes, it would be loving to help them often, but you don't get to demand it. So this brought out the victimhood in everybody. And they said, how could you do such a thing to that poor woman who was 8 months pregnant and, the usual victim stuff. But she knew the rules. She broke the rules, knowing the rules. And so effectively, she threw herself out. Remember, top of our video chat. The question was, what does it mean to not be responsible? She made a choice, and then she chose not to take responsibility for the choice, which is what irresponsible people do. I should have said that at the top of the hour. That's what it means. I choose what I want, but I don't want the consequences. The man who ran the halfway house simply required that she pay the consequences for her choices. Later, he learned that she'd been doing this kind of thing all of her life. Well, no surprise there. Everywhere, always blaming somebody else. And he learned that after he threw her out, she admitted herself to alcohol and drug rehab and might be headed toward cleaning up her life. We'll see. But it all started with one man who had the guts to require a victim to be responsible. A victim will try to make you feel bad for making them be responsible every time. How could you do this to me? How could you blame me? It's not my fault. How come you're so mean? How could blah, blah, blah. They blame everybody but them. They don't want to pay the price for their choices. But this man required it. That's beautiful. What if, as a result of his throwing her out, she does go to drug rehab or alcohol rehab or whatever and changes her life and learns how to raise her child? What if she does that? We have no idea. But somebody has to do something because victims don't change on their own. They just don't do it. The world would change if more people had this kind of courage. More employers, more parents, more everybody. Now, brief addendum. At one point, the woman came back to the halfway house and screamed at the man who threw her out and blamed him for making her homeless. He explained himself once why he threw her out, because she broke the rules. And then he refused to engage in further argument. She said, well, I'm confused. I just screamed at you and you're not angry. And he said, I decided this morning that I wasn't going to be angry today. That just stopped me cold. No kidding. He decided that morning, long before he had an interaction with her, he wasn't going to be angry that day. It was a decision. It's a decision we can all make. This is a challenge. You can take it or not. Doesn't affect me. As you listen, after you listen to this video chat, make a decision that you won't be angry at anybody, that you will take responsibility for your own feelings for the next 24 hours and see what happens. We really can all do this. New subject. I know a man who is struggling with the use of porn. It interferes with his job, his relationships, his schooling, his happiness. It's pretty much left him a shell of a person. And he writes, this is so tricky, meaning his porn addiction, because it's everywhere, meaning the temptation to use. Yeah, it really is. Everywhere in so many ways. There are versions of it. It's easier for me. If you're 14 years old, you go, I don't see it everywhere. Well, when I was a kid, advertisements and television and movies were not like they are now. They would have been banned. They would have been shown in local, what did they call them? Art theaters. In fact, for the longest time, that was the argument, was that it was free speech and that porn was a form of art. You can find it now everywhere. Advertisements, newspapers, magazines, movies. You used to be able to rely on the rating of movies. PG-13 movies were safe to take your kids to. Oh, that's not true anymore. And it's everywhere on the internet. If I go to look something up in the right hand quarter or third, there are advertisements just for, I'm assuming, everything in the world. And when something says, you really have to see this, yeah, I'm figuring I probably really don't. But I haven't met any of these encounters on the internet that can open your door, not magazine. Well, when you check out at the magazine counter, there are some pictures on the covers of magazines that are pretty hard to miss unless you wear blinders that horses wear. But on the internet, they can't open themselves and bite you on the neck. You have to invite them into your life. At least so far, I haven't encountered that. Even though I know that's probably the dream of many adolescents, that these opportunities would bite them on the neck. The man continues, I haven't intentionally searched porn on the internet in 5 months. It's a long time. But what I notice that I keep doing is objectifying women on pictures through social media, and goodness, on Facebook. I've been on Facebook, I don't know, 10 times because I was looking up somebody who wrote me an email and I forgot who they were. Some of the pictures are pretty risque. They wouldn't have been in magazines when I was a kid. But to continue with you, I notice that I keep objectifying women on pictures through social media, understandable, or it just pops up and I feel tempted and I watch it for a few seconds. I get it. It's tempting on many levels. And it is on social media because so many women on Facebook dress like they're advertising themselves, advertising their bodies. And yes, so do many guys. It's just more common with women. But in recent years, no times have any of these pictures, I emphasize again, just popped up on my screen. You have to be someplace questionable already. So the question obviously in my mind is, why do you have to be on Facebook? This stuff just doesn't just appear before me when I'm researching, say, the history of Mesopotamia. They never show pictures of naked Mesopotamians as I'm doing this. They probably would, but there were no cameras back then. You continue. Today, I Googled a name of a woman on the internet, knowing what she is like, and sure enough, I found provocative pictures, and then poof, there was the porn, proving what I just said. People don't just drive off the road. Rare exceptions, but we won't talk about those. First, they hit the rough shoulder. At least in this country, major roads have little ridges built into the asphalt to tell you you're about to drive off the road. Just like as a plane is landing in an airport, there are little sounds that the pilot hears if he's off the flight path. And then, so we have intentionally ridged asphalt, we have rough shoulders, there are ways to tell us that we're going off the road. There are warnings. Same with most other things in life. We don't just get assaulted by something that sinks us. You continue. I feel as though I'm just never going to get past this, because even when I don't intentionally search online for it, I still see it somewhere. I don't claim to have the answer for you. I don't. But as soon as I read your email, one word occurred to me, which is a little weird, but it did. Peanuts. I thought it was a little strange. Kind of a weird word, especially since porn and peanuts have, I don't think, ever occurred to me together in the same sentence before. And then it kind of unfolded in my mind. I have several friends who are crazy allergic to peanuts. I mean, insanely. They don't actually have to eat a peanut. Now, if the chef preparing their food touches peanut oil while preparing another dish and then doesn't wash his hands thoroughly or wear gloves and change the gloves, that little bit of oil is enough to cause a severe, potentially fatal reaction. If there's peanut dust in the air, that's enough to do it. In fact, if my friends fly on commercial airlines, they have to notify the airline ahead of time, and the plane does a special cleaning of the food area, and they won't serve peanuts to the other passengers. No kidding. Is that fair? To my friends or those of us who want our darn peanuts to go with those luxury seats, that massage our hip bones, fair has nothing to do with it. It's just what it is. So they have to avoid peanuts at all costs or die. And it turns out that even though peanuts are no joke everywhere, the peanut oil, the peanut dust, everything, if they go to sufficient lengths and they go to restaurants that understand the lengths that they're going to, my friends are still alive and haven't had a peanut allergic reaction in a very long time, because they work at avoiding it instead of just saying, well, everywhere I go, there are peanuts, and so I've had to die several times. That just wouldn't make sense, would it? I know people who are allergic to gluten and bee stings and all kinds of things. And if the reaction is serious enough, they make it their life or death business to see to it that they're never around it. So they can't control its existence, but they can control where they are in relation to whatever this substance is. There. Apparently, porn is like that for you. You have to consider it like a substance that will send you into anaphylactic shock and kill you. And then you'll avoid it. Until you take it that seriously, you're just going to go, well, everywhere I go, there it is. No, you just avoid it. You use email. So accept emails only from people you know. If you accept emails, I don't, from people that I don't know, then anything could be in it. You stay away from Facebook. You stay away from Snapchat. You stay away from every app that could trip you up. Movies, you can't trust ratings anymore, but you can go to places like, and if you like, this is an advertisement. You go to places like the website that's called kids, KIDS, hyphen, in mind, kids in mind, with the hyphen between each of the words. And usually it will do an auto fill in. I can't remember if it's .net or .com or whatever, or type it in your Google and it'll bring up the right one. Kids in mind, and it will tell you exactly what's in a movie. So if you're anticipating going to a movie, it will tell you exactly how much nudity, and it does it in this order. It gives it a 3-number rating. How much nudity on a scale of 1 to 10, how much violence, and how much profanity. And then it will describe it. It will say, 2 couples kiss passionately, husband and wife. That's it. Completely clothed. It will say that. So you know what to expect. Donna and I were once going to a movie. It was based on some comic book series, which I was not familiar with. Really excellent actors. It looked like it was going to be exciting. The reviews were good for it. And I thought, well, before we go to the movie, I'll go to Kids in Mind. Being a kid anyway. And the Kids in Mind rating was 10, 9, 10. So we didn't go to the restaurant where peanuts were in. We didn't go to the restaurant called Peanut Heaven. If you're going to a restaurant, you check for allergies. If you're visually engaging in something, check it out, just like you would for peanuts. So really, take it this seriously, and you'll discover that even though it is, in your words, everywhere, you can diligently avoid it. Like, no kidding. New subject. This was written many weeks ago by a woman experienced in real love. She said, "Do you find it frustrating teaching people who don't listen?" And I paused and thought, that's a good question. Yes. Sometimes, usually when I'm like overloaded. So I tend to make fairly diligent attempts, much like avoiding a peanut allergy. Boy, this responsibility thing is running through this video chat, huh? I tend to make fairly diligent attempts to avoid getting overloaded. So sometimes people will say, do you have a time at this time? I might. But I've assessed that that's too many calls in a row, and I don't want to get frustrated teaching somebody who doesn't listen. Or if I'm in pain myself. Now, this woman wrote this several weeks ago, and I said, like I am today, because I'd had neurosurgery on my back, which proved to be considerably more painful than I'd imagined. And I'd had it before, but this one was 3 times more extensive and turns out at least 3 times more painful. The recovery was longer than I'd anticipated. Neither condition, however, being busy or being in pain, among other conditions, guarantees frustration. They just increase the risk. So I tend to do whatever I can to accomplish one of 3 things if I happen to be in pain or I happen to be tired. 1. So remember, these are things I tend to do when I can't avoid being tired. I wake up feeling not great. Sometimes I just cancel all calls for the day. But if I can't, I'll try one of 3 things. 1 is to compartmentalize. Sometimes I might be tired or overwhelmed, but I can set that aside like in a box, close the lid, give what I have, not mingled with those distractions. Athletes do this all the time. They can approach the sidelines so hobbled they can't walk, but for the game, perform as though there were no physical impairment at all. Michael Jordan once did a famous version of this where he had the flu and he could hardly get out of bed, and then he did get out of bed and had one of his best NBA games ever. This takes a lot of work. It's pretty tiring. You can't keep doing that over and over again. Second, you schedule better. You space things out to avoid the tiredness or the busyness. And if I can't do either of those, if I can't compartmentalize well enough and I can't space things well enough, then I just cancel calls for half a day or all day or sometimes multiple days. Otherwise, I can't be useful. You can't love somebody while you're so distracted that you can barely pay attention to anything. When people don't listen, after they've indicated that they want to learn and grow, because we're talking about, do I get frustrated? Mostly I feel sad. Sometimes a sense of urgency. I can recall uncounted occasions when someone has appeared to be deaf to everything they're being told, to everything reasonable, deaf to reason, pleading, and love. And I've simply persisted in loving and teaching them, and it worked. On other occasions, I've chosen to ramp up the volume exponentially, fairly quickly, to get their attention, because it's life or death. When I say ramp up the volume, I don't mean anger. I mean ramp up the emotional directness or the emotional intensity. Sometimes that works, sometimes not. Remember, again, I'm still talking about what do I do if somebody's, not listening? Is it frustrating? I don't ever claim to do that perfectly. How could you? You're dealing with a human being. How can you know what perfect is? Either in timing or approach or degree. But I'm willing to try. Nobody else has tried. And I do this with people who have been to 20 therapists and they're still in the same place. So I figure, what do we have to lose? And lastly, occasionally, I give up. If somebody claims to want to grow, but then back to the subject of the top of the hour, they're absolutely irresponsible. They won't take responsibility for doing anything to change their life, even if it's life or death. There's no reason to keep going. But overall, if it's life or death, I tend to persist. And if I make a mistake, it's persisting too long. But there's some people who literally are not capable of changing. They've been too wounded, but it's not just about the wounds. I've seen some people with the worst wounds imaginable, and they recover the fastest. So it's not the wounds. It's something about what they brought with them before they were born, their DNA, their epigenome, their experience, their education, all those things combined together in ways that we couldn't possibly understand. So what's the solution? Well, what we've talked about in endless video chats. Bring all the love that we can to a situation and do it repeatedly. Occasionally, we also add teaching, but we always bring loving and we see what happens. Loving may not always work. It may not always yield visible results, but it yields better results than anything else. We'll see you in a week.